Jasmine Washington stands frozen in the narrow airplane aisle as passengers stare in shocked silence. The flight attendant, Rebecca, lies about Jasmine's first-class ticket being invalid. Jasmine declares she's canceling the entire flight, revealing she's the airline's new chief operating officer on an undercover evaluation. Rebecca's face drains of color. Before I dive into this shocking story of discrimination and its consequences, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories of people standing up against injustice and making real change in the world. Jasmine Washington wasn't just any passenger boarding Skywave Airlines Flight 2867 from Atlanta to San Francisco that Wednesday morning. A Harvard Business School graduate with 15 years in the aviation industry, she had recently been appointed Chief Operating Officer of Skywave after the company faced mounting criticism about its corporate culture. The board had specifically hired her to address a troubling surge in customer complaints, particularly those concerning racial discrimination. The numbers don't lie, Malcolm Robbins, her executive assistant, had said during their morning briefing 3 days earlier. He slid a tablet across the polished conference table in Jasmine's new corner office. Complaints from black passengers have increased 47% in the last quarter alone. Jasmine scrolled through the data, her brow furrowing. And what's been done about these complaints? That's just it, Malcolm replied, adjusting his glasses. Very little. Most are dismissed as misunderstandings or passenger sensitivity. No systemic investigation has been conducted. Jasmine set the tablet down, her decision made. Then I'll conduct one myself. That's how Jasmine found herself planning an undercover evaluation of the airline service. She would experience Skywave as a regular customer, no executive perks, no special treatment, no advance notice to staff. Just a black woman traveling first class, like thousands of others every day. The morning of the flight, Jasmine dressed deliberately casual in dark jeans, a simple blouse, and minimal jewelry. She pulled her hair back in a neat bun and wore just enough makeup to look polished but not ostentatious. Nothing about her appearance screamed executive, and that was precisely the point. Atlanta International Airport buzzed with the usual morning chaos as Jasmine wheeled her carry-on through the terminal. She observed operations with a professional eye, noting efficiency at security checkpoints, staff interactions with diverse passengers, and overall airport management. So far, nothing flagged her attention, the normal frustrations of air travel seemed evenly distributed. Malcolm met her at a coffee shop near her gate, maintaining the pretense of a casual meeting rather than an official one. Your boarding pass, he said, sliding a folded printout across the table while passing her a latte. First class, seat 3A, as requested. Purchased through normal channels, no executive discount codes or corporate account. Jasmine tucked the boarding pass into her purse. And the rest of the evaluation team? Already in position. 2 quality assurance specialists on your flight, 3 more monitoring customer service communications related to this route. Everything set. Malcolm hesitated, then added, just be prepared. The statistics suggest you may encounter resistance. That's exactly what I'm testing, Jasmine replied, taking a sip of her coffee. If Skywave treats all passengers equally, I'll have a pleasant, uneventful flight. If not. She left the thought unfinished. As Malcolm departed, Jasmine remained at the cafe table, observing the check-in counter for her flight. The gate agent, a young man whose name tag read Terrence, processed passengers efficiently. But something caught her attention, the subtle difference in his demeanor. White passengers received eye contact, casual conversation, and friendly smiles. Black passengers received politeness, but it was perfunctory, mechanical. When her boarding group was called, Jasmine approached the counter, boarding pass and ID in hand. Terrence's smile tightened almost imperceptibly as she approached. Good morning, Jasmine said warmly. Morning, he replied, not matching her tone. Boarding pass. No, good, before morning. No, please, before requesting her pass. Small things, perhaps, but Jasmine had been trained to notice such details. She handed over her documents. Terence's eyebrows lifted slightly as he scanned her first-class ticket, a momentary surprise quickly masked by professional detachment. "Thank you, Ms. Washington. Enjoy your flight." No casual conversation. No, "have a nice flight," or "welcome aboard." Just the bare minimum of professional courtesy. As Jasmine made her way toward the jetway, she noticed two white businessmen who had been behind her in line receiving a much warmer send-off, complete with jokes about San Francisco weather and recommendations for restaurants. The evidence was mounting, but Jasmine remained objective. Perhaps Terence was just having a moment. Perhaps she'd caught him during a lull in his customer service energy. The real test would be on board. What she didn't know as she approached the aircraft door was just how definitive that test would be. The jetway stretched before Jasmine like a gauntlet, fluorescent lights creating harsh shadows as she rolled her carry-on toward the aircraft. Ahead, she could see the Skywave Airlines cabin crew greeting passengers at the door, the critical first impression that set the tone for the entire flight experience. Two flight attendants stood at the entrance. A tall man with salt and pepper hair whose name tag identified him as Gregory, and a blonde woman with a tight smile whose tag read Rebecca. Gregory welcomed each passenger with the same practiced warmth. Rebecca, however, seemed to be conducting her own invisible sorting process, her greeting varying subtly depending on who stepped across the threshold. As Jasmine approached, she activated the voice recorder application on her phone, a standard practice during her evaluations. She observed Rebecca's expression shift, the professional smile becoming just a fraction less genuine, her eyes conducting a rapid assessment. "Welcome aboard," Rebecca said, her tone noticeably cooler than it had been for the elderly white couple ahead of Jasmine. "Thank you," Jasmine replied with genuine warmth, meeting Rebecca's eyes directly. "I'm looking forward to the flight." Rebecca's gaze flicked to Jasmine's boarding pass, lingering on the one that designated first class. Something hardened in her expression, but she merely nodded and gestured toward the left. "First class is to your left," she said, her tone carrying a subtle note of skepticism. Behind Jasmine, a tall white man in an expensive suit approached the door. Immediately, Rebecca's demeanor transformed. "Good morning, sir. Welcome aboard Flight 2867 to San Francisco. First class is to your left, and I'll be taking care of you today. Can I help you with that bag?" The contrast was striking, and Jasmine noted it carefully in her mental evaluation. The businessman, Darren Thompson, seemed to notice it too, his eyes meeting Jasmine's briefly in a moment of uncomfortable recognition. As Jasmine made her way down the narrow first-class aisle, she became aware of being watched. Other passengers, predominantly white, predominantly male, tracked her progress with varying degrees of subtlety. A woman with warm brown skin and a Spanish accent, later identified as Alicia Rodriguez, offered Jasmine a small smile of solidarity from across the aisle. Jasmine had almost reached her seat when she noticed an elderly black man already seated in the first-class cabin. Gerald Wilson, as she would later learn, was a retired doctor who flew frequently between Atlanta and San Francisco to visit his grandchildren. He nodded to Jasmine with the weary acknowledgement of someone who recognized a shared experience. "Miss?" Rebecca's voice came from behind, startling in its proximity. The flight attendant had followed Jasmine into the cabin, hovering uncomfortably close. "Can I see your boarding pass again?" Jasmine turned, maintaining her composure. "Of course," she replied, producing the document she'd already shown at the door moments earlier. Rebecca took the boarding pass, examining it with exaggerated scrutiny. Her eyes narrowed as she looked from the paper to Jasmine and back again. The message was clear: "You don't belong here." "Is there a problem?" Jasmine asked, her voice level. "Just double-checking," Rebecca replied with a tight smile. "We've had some confusion with seating assignments lately." From across the aisle, Darren Thompson watched the interaction with increasing discomfort, his own boarding pass untouched, his path to his seat unquestioned. "Everything appears to be in order," Rebecca finally conceded, returning the boarding pass with obvious reluctance. Seat 3A is just ahead on your left. Thank you, Jasmine said, taking back her documentation. As she continued toward her seat, Jasmine could hear Rebecca's dramatically different tone as she greeted the passengers behind her. Mr. Thompson. So lovely to have you with us again. Can I get you a pre-departure beverage once you're settled? Jasmine stowed her carry-on in the overhead compartment and settled into the spacious first-class seat, her mind processing the interactions she'd observed. Was this the experience that thousands of black passengers faced when flying Skywave? The subtle questions, the double checks, the implicit messaging that they didn't belong in premium cabins? As she fastened her seatbelt, Jasmine noticed Gerald Wilson watching her with knowing eyes. First time in first class, he asked quietly. No, Jasmine replied. You. 30 years of flying this route, at least 100 times in first class, he said. And every single time, they check my boarding pass twice. Sometimes 3 times. Jasmine nodded. Has it gotten any better over the years? Gerald gave a soft, humorless laugh. They've gotten more subtle. That's about it. Their conversation was interrupted as Rebecca approached, her expression tightly controlled as she addressed Gerald. Sir, the captain has requested that we verify all first-class documentation again. There seems to be some confusion in the system today. Gerald sighed, producing his boarding pass without comment. He'd been through this routine before. Jasmine felt a slow burn of indignation rising within her. The system confusion seemed suspiciously targeted. But she remained professional, observing and documenting rather than confronting. The real test was yet to come. And come it would, more dramatically than even she had anticipated. The pre-departure hustle continued around Jasmine as flight attendants prepared the cabin for takeoff. Rebecca moved efficiently through the first-class section, offering beverages and hanging jackets for white passengers while somehow repeatedly overlooking Jasmine and Gerald. The pattern was so consistent it couldn't be coincidence. When Jasmine finally raised her hand to request a water, Rebecca's smile tightened. We'll be serving beverages after takeoff, she said curtly, despite having just handed a mimosa to the passenger across the aisle. Darren Thompson, seated in 3B beside Jasmine, frowned at the obvious disparity. Excuse me, he said, addressing Rebecca. I believe the lady asked for water. Rebecca's expression flickered between surprise and annoyance. Of course, sir. Right away. She returned with a plastic cup of water for Jasmine, not the glass tumbler she'd provided to other first-class passengers. Thank you, Jasmine said, accepting the water with dignity. She caught Darren's eye and nodded slightly in appreciation for his intervention. I'm Darren, he said, extending his hand. Frequent flyer, unfortunately. You heading to San Francisco for business or pleasure? A bit of both, Jasmine replied truthfully. I'm Jasmine. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the front of the cabin. A new passenger had boarded late, a young white woman rushing to claim the last first-class seat, 1D. Rebecca immediately attended to her, taking her coat and offering a full selection of pre-departure beverages. As the final preparations for departure continued, Jasmine observed Rebecca engaging in animated conversation with another flight attendant, Melissa, both of them glancing repeatedly in her direction. Their whispered exchange grew increasingly intense until Rebecca finally nodded decisively and approached Jasmine's seat with Melissa hovering nervously behind her. Excuse me, Ms. Washington, Rebecca said, her voice pitched to Carrie. There seems to be an issue with your seating assignment. Conversations around them quieted as passengers tuned in to the developing situation. What sort of issue? Jasmine asked calmly, though she already suspected what was coming. Our system is showing that seat 3A should be unoccupied on this flight, Rebecca stated, despite the first-class cabin being clearly not full. I'll need to see your boarding pass again. Jasmine retrieved her boarding pass from her purse and handed it over without comment. Rebecca made a show of examining it closely. This appears to be for a different flight, she declared. That's not possible, Jasmine replied evenly. The gate agent scanned it when I boarded, and it was accepted. Rebecca's expression hardened. Nevertheless, there's clearly been a mistake. We have a seat available in economy if you'd like to continue on this flight. The implication was clear, you don't belong in first class. Darren Thompson shifted uncomfortably beside her. That's ridiculous, he muttered. I watched you board with a valid first-class pass. Other passengers were now openly watching the confrontation. Alicia Rodriguez looked outraged. Gerald Wilson shook his head in resigned familiarity with the situation. I'd like to speak with the captain, Jasmine said firmly. The captain is preparing for departure and can't be disturbed, Rebecca replied automatically. Now, if you'll gather your belongings, I can escort you to your new seat in economy. I paid for first class, Jasmine stated, her voice level but authoritative. My boarding pass is valid for this flight, this seat. The gate agent verified it, the scanner verified it. There is no legitimate reason for me to move. Rebecca's face flushed. Ma'am, I need you to lower your voice. I'm speaking at a perfectly appropriate volume, Jasmine replied, aware that Rebecca was attempting to cast her as the aggressor. What I need is for you to explain why you're asking me to move when my documentation is in order. Our system, Rebecca began again, has mysteriously developed an issue only with my seat, Jasmine finished for her. Not with Mr. Wilson's seat. Not with any other passenger's seat. Just mine. Several passengers had begun recording the interaction on their phones. Rebecca noticed this and became increasingly flustered. This is a security issue, she declared desperately. If you refuse to comply, I'll be forced to call security. Please do, Jasmine replied calmly. I welcome the opportunity to discuss this situation with airport security. In the meantime, I'd still like to speak with the captain. The captain is busy, Rebecca insisted, her voice rising. Then the first officer, Jasmine countered. Or your lead flight attendant. Someone in a position of authority who can verify that your system is actually showing a discrepancy. Rebecca's composure finally cracked. Look, we all know what's happening here. There's been a mistake with your ticket, and there's a perfectly good seat in economy where you belong. Why are you making this so difficult? The cabin went silent. The phrase, where you belong, hung in the air, its implication unmistakable. Darren Thompson stood up. I'd like to speak with the captain as well. This is unacceptable. Sir, please stay out of this, Rebecca snapped. No, I don't think I will, Darren replied firmly. I've witnessed this entire interaction, and it's abundantly clear what's happening here. Alicia Rodriguez had also risen from her seat. I am recording this, she announced. This discrimination is not okay. Rebecca looked around wildly as she lost control of the situation. Everyone needs to take their seats immediately. This is a security issue. The only security issue here is your discriminatory treatment of a legitimate first-class passenger, Gerald Wilson stated, his quiet dignity cutting through the chaos. Passengers in economy had begun to notice the commotion, craning their necks to see what was happening in first class. The atmosphere in the cabin had transformed from pre-departure routine to tense standoff. This is your final warning, Rebecca threatened, though it was clear she had no actual plan for what would happen after this final warning. No, Jasmine said, rising to her feet. This is yours. And with that, she reached into her purse and withdrew not just her boarding pass, but her corporate identification. My name is Jasmine Washington, Chief Operating Officer of Skywave Airlines. And this flight isn't going anywhere today. The first-class cabin froze in stunned silence. Rebecca stared at Jasmine's corporate ID badge, her mouth opening and closing without producing sound, like a fish suddenly pulled from water. The glossy badge with Jasmine's executive portrait and gold C-suite designation gleamed under the cabin lights, impossible to dismiss or explain away. I don't understand, Rebecca finally stammered, her voice barely audible. "I think you do," Jasmine replied evenly. "For the past 6 months, Skywave has received an unprecedented number of discrimination complaints. The board hired me specifically to address this issue. Today, I was conducting an undercover evaluation of our service quality." She gestured around the cabin. "And you have failed that evaluation spectacularly." As if on cue, the cockpit door opened, and Captain James Brooks emerged, alerted by the commotion. His eyes widened in recognition. "Ms. Washington? I didn't realize you were on this flight." "That was intentional, Captain Brooks," Jasmine explained. "I needed to experience our service as a regular passenger would." She turned back to Rebecca. "Unfortunately, what I experienced was blatant discrimination." Rebecca's face had drained of all color. "I didn't. It was a system error." "Was it a system error when you checked my boarding pass twice but not those of white passengers?" Jasmine asked. "Was it a system error when you served pre-departure beverages to everyone except me and Mr. Wilson? Was it a system error when you claimed my valid first-class seat should be unoccupied despite this cabin not being full?" Captain Brooks's expression darkened as he processed the situation. "Rebecca, is this true?" Before Rebecca could respond, Jasmine continued. "This flight evaluation has failed our most basic service standards. Captain, I'm invoking my authority as COO to cancel this flight effective immediately. This crew will be placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation, and all passengers will be rebooked and compensated for their inconvenience." A chorus of groans and protests erupted from throughout the cabin as passengers realized their travel plans were suddenly derailed. Rebecca's professional facade completely crumbled. "You can't do this. It's one misunderstanding. You're overreacting." "It's not one misunderstanding," Gerald Wilson interjected quietly. "It's the same misunderstanding I've experienced for 30 years. Captain Brooks nodded solemnly. "I stand by the company's decision, Ms. Washington. We'll begin deboarding procedures immediately." Rebecca, desperate now, clutched at Jasmine's arm. "Please, you don't understand. I need this job. I have bills, a mortgage." "Perhaps you should have considered that before deciding which passengers belonged in first class," Jasmine replied, gently but firmly removing Rebecca's hand. Jasmine turned to address the now restless cabin. Taking the intercom handset from Captain Brooks, she pressed the announcement button. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Jasmine Washington, Chief Operating Officer of Skywave Airlines. I regret to inform you that this flight is cancelled due to a failed service evaluation. All passengers will be automatically rebooked on the next available flight, provided hotel accommodations if necessary, and compensated with vouchers for the inconvenience. I apologize for the disruption to your travel plans, but Skywave is committed to providing respectful, equitable service to all our passengers, without exception. Today, we failed to meet that standard." As murmurs spread throughout the cabin, Jasmine lowered the handset and turned to face the gathering of witnesses to this extraordinary moment. "What do you think about Jasmine's decision to cancel the entire flight? Was it justified or an overreaction? Comment number 1 if you think she made the right call standing up against discrimination, even at the cost of inconveniencing other passengers. Like this video if you believe more executives should experience their company's services firsthand like Jasmine did. And don't forget to subscribe to see what happens next in this shocking confrontation." Speaking of what happens next, what do you think the aftermath will be for Rebecca and the airline? Will this incident lead to real change, or will it be swept under the rug once the immediate crisis passes? Let's find out as our story continues. The deboarding process unfolded in barely contained chaos. Passengers filed out in a mixture of confusion, anger, and morbid fascination with the drama they had just witnessed. Some glared at Jasmine as they passed, blaming her for the disruption to their travel plans. Others nodded in solidarity, recognizing the importance of the stand she had taken. Jasmine remained at the front of the aircraft, maintaining her composure as she personally apologized to each passenger. Captain Brooks stood beside her, lending the weight of his authority to her decision. Rebecca had been quickly whisked away by other crew members, her face streaked with mascara from barely contained tears. In the terminal, the scene escalated as frustrated travelers surrounded gate agents demanding immediate rebooking. Jasmine spotted Malcolm pushing through the crowd, flanked by two women she recognized from HR and a man from the legal department. "We came as soon as we got your text," Malcolm said, reaching her side. "Is it as bad as you indicated?" "Worse," Jasmine replied quietly. "Clear discrimination, documented by multiple witnesses, including myself. And it wasn't just one crew member, there were systemic failures at multiple touchpoints." Malcolm winced. "The board isn't going to like this." "The board hired me to fix a problem," Jasmine replied firmly. "Sometimes fixing requires breaking first." She turned to the HR representatives. "I need a conference room secured immediately. We'll need statements from key witnesses before they disperse." Within 30 minutes, Jasmine had established an impromptu command center in a private airport conference room. Malcolm coordinated with customer service to expedite rebookings while the HR team prepared to take statements. Rebecca sat alone at one end of the conference table, still in her uniform but with her wings pin removed, a symbolic stripping of her authority. Her earlier panic had given way to a hollow-eyed resignation as the full consequences of her actions began to sink in. Darren Thompson was the first witness to provide a statement. The businessman entered the conference room with purposeful strides, taking a seat across from the HR representatives. "Mr. Thompson, we appreciate your willingness to provide a statement," began Sandra Chen from HR. "Could you please describe what you observed on Flight 2867 today?" Darren leaned forward. "I watched a textbook case of racial discrimination unfold right beside me. The flight attendant, Rebecca, treated Ms. Washington differently from the moment she boarded. Different tone, different level of service, different standard of proof for her right to be in first class." He shook his head in disgust. "I travel over 100,000 miles annually with various airlines. I've seen subtle bias before, but this was blatant." As Darren concluded his statement, Alicia Rodriguez entered, phone in hand. "I have video," she said without preamble. "From when the flight attendant tried to move Ms. Washington to economy." The legal representative perked up immediately. "Ms. Rodriguez, that would be extremely helpful evidence. Would you be willing to share that recording with the company?" "That's why I'm here," Alicia replied. "This needs to be addressed, not just today but permanently." Throughout the afternoon, a procession of witnesses provided statements. Some passengers reported similar experiences on previous Skywave flights. Others described observing the different treatment of passengers of color throughout the boarding process. Most compelling was Gerald Wilson, who arrived last, leaning on a cane he hadn't used on the aircraft. "I've been flying first class on this airline since before it was called Skywave," he said quietly. "Back then, the discrimination was overt. Flight attendants would actually say things like, 'Are you sure you're in the right section?' Now it's more subtle, but no less present. The double-checking of my boarding pass. The surprise when I order certain drinks. The assumptions about my profession." He fixed his gaze on Jasmine. "This has been going on for decades. The question is, what makes today different?" As the testimonies continued, Rebecca remained silent, her earlier defiance replaced by defensive withdrawal. When finally asked to explain her actions, she retreated behind a wall of procedural justifications. "I was following protocol for suspected boarding pass irregularities," she insisted, though she couldn't explain why those irregularities seemed to apply only to certain passengers. "Is there documentation of this protocol?" Jasmine asked. Rebecca hesitated. "It's understood procedure." "Understood by whom?" Jasmine pressed. "Senior flight attendants," Rebecca replied vaguely. "It's just how things are done." This passive admission of systemic bias was perhaps more damning than any individual act of discrimination. It suggested a culture where bias had become so normalized it didn't require explicit instructions, it was simply how things are done. As the conference room emptied, Jasmine found herself face to face with Rebecca for the first time since the aircraft. "Do you understand why your actions today were unacceptable?" Jasmine asked directly. Rebecca's jaw tightened. "I was just doing my job." "Your job is to provide equal service to all passengers, regardless of race, gender, or any other characteristic," Jasmine corrected. "Not to decide who belongs in which cabin based on your personal biases." "It wasn't about race," Rebecca protested weakly. "It was about the system." "The system you couldn't actually show anyone," Jasmine noted. "The system that somehow only flagged certain passengers." "That system?" Rebecca fell silent, her defense crumbling under scrutiny. As the impromptu investigation wrapped up, Malcolm approached Jasmine with a grim expression. "Social media's exploding. Someone uploaded video of the confrontation. It's gone viral with the hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack." Jasmine nodded, unsurprised. "The board meeting I requested?" "Scheduled for 5 p.m. at headquarters," Malcolm confirmed. "Transportation is waiting." As Jasmine gathered her materials, Gerald Wilson approached one last time. "Ms. Washington," he said quietly, "thank you for what you did today. But the real test isn't what happens on one flight. It's what happens next." Jasmine met his gaze steadily. "I understand, Mr. Wilson. And I give you my word, what happens next will be different." As she left the airport, flanked by her team, Jasmine knew she was walking into a corporate firestorm. But for the first time in Skywave's history, that fire might actually forge something better from the ashes of exposed discrimination. The Skywave Airlines headquarters in downtown Atlanta projected an image of serene corporate confidence. Its glass and steel facade reflected the late afternoon sun as Jasmine's car pulled into the executive parking area. But behind that gleaming exterior, chaos reigned. Jasmine could feel it the moment she stepped into the lobby, the heightened tension, the nervous glances from staff who had clearly heard about the morning's events. Her executive assistant Malcolm kept pace beside her, updating her in hurried whispers as they moved toward the elevator. "Stock is down 4% already on the news," he reported. "PR has been fielding calls non-stop from every major network and publication. The video has over 2 million views and counting." "Board members?" Jasmine asked, stepping into the private executive elevator. "All en route or already here?" "None happy." Malcolm grimaced. "Howard Blackwell is particularly vocal." Jasmine nodded, unsurprised. Howard Blackwell, the longest-serving board member, represented the old guard of the airline industry, men who viewed diversity initiatives as necessary evils rather than vital transformations. "And Rebecca?" "HR has her in a holding pattern. The union rep arrived about an hour ago. They're waiting on the outcome of the board meeting." The elevator doors opened directly into the executive floor's reception area, where Jasmine was immediately intercepted by Valerie Chang, Skywave's harried director of public relations. "We need to issue a statement immediately," Valerie insisted, falling into step with them. "Social media is crucifying us. CNN is running the story at the top of the hour." "No statement until after the board meeting," Jasmine replied firmly. "I won't have my response undermined or watered down by committee." Valerie looked like she might argue further, but something in Jasmine's expression stopped her. Instead, she handed over a tablet. "These are the hashtags currently trending. Hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack is the primary one, but hashtag Skywave discrimination and hashtag boycott Skywave are gaining traction fast." Jasmine scanned the social media firestorm as she continued toward the boardroom. The video, captured by Alicia Rodriguez, had been edited to focus on the most damning moments of the confrontation, Rebecca suggesting Jasmine belonged in economy, the double-checking of her boarding pass, the threat to call security. Without context, it looked even worse than it had in person. "Damage control options?" Jasmine asked, returning the tablet. "Standard playbook would be a formal apology, termination of the employee involved, mandatory sensitivity training announcement, and a donation to an appropriate civil rights organization, Valerie recited. The standard playbook is precisely why we're in this situation, Jasmine replied. We need systemic change, not performative damage control. They reached the boardroom doors, where Malcolm gave Jasmine's arm a supportive squeeze before peeling off to his adjacent office. Valerie hung back, clearly excluded from the high-level meeting to come. Jasmine straightened her shoulders and pushed open the heavy wooden doors. The Skywave Board of Directors, 11 men and 2 women, predominantly white, sat around a massive conference table. Conversation ceased abruptly as she entered. At the head of the table, CEO Richard Harrington gestured to the empty chair at his right. Jasmine, he said, his tone carefully neutral. We've been waiting. I apologize for the delay, she replied, taking her seat. I was securing witness statements while they were still fresh. Yes, about that, Howard Blackwell interjected from across the table. Would you care to explain why you unilaterally decided to cancel a full commercial flight, strand 300 passengers, and generate what might be the worst PR crisis this company has faced in a decade? Jasmine met his gaze evenly. I'd be happy to explain, Howard. But first, I'd like to present the evidence. Over the next 30 minutes, Jasmine methodically laid out what she had observed and experienced, the discriminatory treatment, the escalating confrontation, the systemic failures at multiple levels. She played selected clips from witness videos and read excerpts from their statements. This isn't an isolated incident, she concluded. This is a culture of discrimination that has become so normalized within our company that employees don't even recognize it as wrong anymore. They call it protocol or procedure, but what it really amounts to is racial profiling of our own paying customers. Silence followed her presentation, broken only by the sound of Richard Harrington tapping his pen against the polished table. Even if everything you've presented is accurate, Howard finally said, canceling an entire flight seems like an extreme overreaction. Couldn't this have been handled more discreetly? Discreetly, Jasmine repeated, letting the word hang in the air. You mean swept under the rug? Hidden away with a private reprimand and a form letter of apology? That's exactly how we've been handling these incidents for years, Howard, and it's precisely why they continue to happen. She stood, commanding the room's attention, and displayed a series of graphs on the boardroom's main screen. These are our customer satisfaction metrics, broken down by demographic. Notice anything? The disparity was impossible to ignore. Black passengers consistently reported lower satisfaction scores across every service category. And here, she continued, advancing to the next slide, are our customer retention rates. We lose black first-class passengers at 3 times the rate of white passengers. That represents millions in lost revenue annually. Richard Harrington leaned forward. What are you suggesting, Jasmine? I'm not suggesting anything, she replied firmly. I'm telling you what needs to happen. Skywave requires a complete overhaul of its training programs, service protocols, and corporate culture. Starting today. Howard Blackwell scoffed. And you propose to lead this overhaul? That's precisely what you hired me to do, Jasmine reminded him. Unless you prefer, I tender my resignation and take what I've learned about Skywave's practices to the Department of Transportation. The threat hung in the air, its implications clear to everyone present. A DOT investigation would make today's social media crisis look like a minor hiccup. That won't be necessary, Richard interjected smoothly, shooting Howard a warning glance. The board brought you on specifically to address these issues. We should give you the latitude to do so. He turned to the other directors. Wouldn't you agree? One by one, the board members nodded, some more reluctantly than others. Howard Blackwell remained the lone holdout, his expression thunderous. And what about Rebecca Martin? He demanded. Are we firing a 20-year employee based on one incident? This wasn't one incident, Jasmine corrected. This was simply the incident that was caught on camera and went viral. HR has already pulled Ms. Martin's file. There are 7 previous complaints of similar behavior, all dismissed without serious investigation. Howard fell silent, his opposition deflated by this new information. "I'll need full authority to implement necessary changes," Jasmine continued, pressing her advantage. "New training programs, revised service protocols, external auditing of our practices, and a complete restructuring of how we handle discrimination complaints." Richard Harrington looked around the table, reading the room. Whatever his personal feelings, he was first and foremost a pragmatist. The board's mood had shifted decisively in Jasmine's favor. "I believe Ms. Washington has made a compelling case," he announced. "I move that we authorize her to implement the changes she deems necessary to address this situation, subject to quarterly progress reviews by the board." The motion passed with only Howard abstaining. As the meeting concluded and board members filed out, Richard held Jasmine back with a light touch on her arm. "That was well played," he said quietly once they were alone. "But you've made powerful enemies today. Howard has friends throughout the industry." "I didn't take this job to make friends," Jasmine replied. "I took it to make change." Richard's expression was unreadable. "Just be careful. The airline industry can be unforgiving to reformers." As Jasmine left the boardroom, she found Malcolm waiting, his expression cautiously hopeful. "Well?" he asked. "We got what we needed," she confirmed. "Now the real work begins." She glanced at her watch. Barely 12 hours had passed since she'd boarded that flight in Atlanta. In that short time, she'd exposed decades of institutional bias, generated a national conversation about discrimination in air travel, and secured a mandate for sweeping reform. But as she headed toward her office to begin drafting those reforms, Jasmine knew the hardest part still lay ahead. Changing policy was one thing. Changing hearts and minds was quite another. Darkness had fallen by the time Jasmine's car service dropped her at her Buckhead apartment. The day's adrenaline was finally wearing off, leaving her bone-tired as she kicked off her shoes just inside the door. Without bothering with the lights, she moved through the familiar space to her kitchen, pouring a glass of water before sinking onto her sofa. For the first time since that morning's confrontation, she was alone with her thoughts. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, media requests, social media notifications, messages from friends and family who had seen the viral video. She silenced it without looking, needing this moment of quiet reflection. The apartment's floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Atlanta's glittering skyline, the city where she'd been born and raised, where her parents had participated in civil rights marches decades before she was born. What would they think of today's events? Almost on cue, her landline rang, the private number only family knew. She smiled faintly as she answered. "I was wondering when you'd call, Dad." William Washington's deep chuckle came through the line. "Your mother and I have been watching the news all day. Our daughter, the viral sensation." "Not exactly how I planned to make headlines," Jasmine admitted. "Plans rarely survive contact with reality," her father replied, his tone growing serious. "Are you okay, baby girl?" The simple question cracked something in Jasmine's carefully maintained composure. Her eyes burned with sudden tears. I don't know," she answered honestly. "It needed to happen. I don't regret it. But it takes something out of you," her father finished. "Fighting these battles always does." William Washington knew this truth intimately. As one of the first black executives at a major Southern bank in the 1970s, he'd faced discrimination far more overt than what Jasmine had experienced today. "Your mother wants to know if you've eaten," he said, lightening the moment. Jasmine laughed despite herself. "Tell Mom I'm fine. I'll grab something later." "She won't like that answer," William warned. "Expect her to show up tomorrow with enough food to feed your entire office." After promising to call them in the morning, Jasmine hung up and let her head fall back against the sofa cushions. The conversation had centered her, reminding her of the broader context of her actions today. Her thoughts drifted to her own history with discrimination, the college professor who'd expressed surprise at her academic excellence, the first-round interview where she'd been mistaken for janitorial staff, the countless times she'd been second-guessed or overlooked in meetings dominated by white male voices. Each incident had shaped her, forged her into someone determined to change systems rather than merely navigate them. But each had also taken a toll, requiring her to compartmentalize her anger and hurt to function in professional spaces not designed for her. Today, those compartments had finally reached capacity. Her phone buzzed again, a text from Darren Thompson, the businessman who had witnessed the confrontation on the plane. He'd given her his card after providing his statement. Just checking in. Saw the news coverage. You've started something important today. If you need an ally in the corporate world, consider me in your corner. The message was followed by another, also, my firm uses Skywave for all corporate travel. 2.3 million in annual bookings. I've informed our travel department will be watching the changes you implement very closely. Jasmine smiled. Allies in unexpected places. Another notification appeared, an email from Gerald Wilson, the elderly black passenger. The subject line read simply, "Thank you." The body contained just one line, "My grandchildren will fly in a different world because of what you did today." These messages offered counterbalance to the others flooding in, the hate mail, the threats, the social media users calling her oversensitive or claiming she'd played the race card. The inevitable backlash had begun almost immediately, with conservative commentators questioning her motivations and minimizing the discrimination she'd experienced. Her phone rang again, Malcolm this time. She considered letting it go to voicemail but decided against it. If he was calling this late, it must be important. "We've got a situation," he said without preamble. Rebecca Martin gave an interview to Channel 7 News. "It's not good." Jasmine sighed, reaching for her remote to turn on the television. "What's she saying?" "That she was following protocol. That you overreacted. That Skywave is throwing her under the bus to appear politically correct." Sure enough, there was Rebecca on screen, her eyes red-rimmed but her expression defiant as she told the reporter, "I've served passengers of all backgrounds for 20 years. This isn't about race. It's about a new executive making an example of a dedicated employee to advance her own agenda." Jasmine watched the interview with a strange detachment. Rebecca truly didn't see what she had done wrong. That was perhaps the most troubling aspect of the entire situation. "Malcolm, remember what Rebecca said in the conference room? About following understood procedure?" "I do," he replied. "That's our real problem," Jasmine said, clarity emerging from her fatigue. "Not just individual bias, but a culture that normalizes it. Rebecca isn't an anomaly, she's a symptom. So what's our next move?" Jasmine considered the question, weighing competing priorities. "We need to be strategic. If we focus solely on Rebecca, we're missing the bigger picture. But we also can't appear to excuse what happened." She made a decision. "Draft a statement acknowledging the incident without naming Rebecca specifically. Emphasize that this reflects systemic issues we're committed to addressing. And start putting together a task force. I want representatives from every level of operations, especially frontline employees." "What about the union?" Malcolm asked. "They're already preparing to fight any disciplinary action against Rebecca." "Schedule a meeting with union leadership for tomorrow morning," Jasmine replied. "We need them as partners, not adversaries. This isn't about punishing one flight attendant, it's about changing a culture." After ending the call, Jasmine remained on the sofa, staring at the muted television where the news had moved on to other stories. The momentary clarity she'd felt began to dissolve into the complexity of what lay ahead. Changing Skywave wouldn't be accomplished with one dramatic stand or a single viral moment. It would require sustained, unglamorous work, revising training materials, establishing new accountability measures, rebuilding trust with customers and employees alike. And all of it would face resistance from those invested in the status quo. As she finally rose to prepare for bed, Jasmine caught her reflection in the window glass, a solitary figure against the backdrop of the city lights. The woman who had boarded that flight this morning had been testing a hypothesis about her company's culture. The woman returning home tonight carried the weight of confirming it. But she also carried something else, a mandate for change and the authority to implement it. Today had been a crucible, but from it emerged a clearer purpose and a stronger resolve. As she drifted towards sleep, Jasmine's thoughts returned to Gerald Wilson's email, "My grandchildren will fly in a different world because of what you did today." That different world wouldn't arrive overnight. But after today, its journey had undeniably begun. 3 weeks after the incident that had catapulted Skywave Airlines into an unwanted spotlight, Jasmine stood at the front of the company's largest training facility, surveying the assembled flight crews. Faces, some receptive, others guarded, looked back at her from rows of seats that mimicked an aircraft cabin. "The easy thing," she began, her voice carrying through the room without need of a microphone, "would be to blame a single employee for what happened 3 weeks ago. To call it an isolated incident, fire the person responsible, and declare the problem solved." She paused, making eye contact with several attendees. "That would also be a lie." A murmur ran through the audience. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "The truth is more challenging. What happened on that flight wasn't an anomaly, it was the predictable outcome of systemic issues within our company culture. Issues that have gone unaddressed for too long." Behind Jasmine, a screen displayed Skywave's new initiative, Equal Skies. Building a culture of inclusion. The logo featured a gradient of skin tones forming the company's signature blue hue. "Starting today, every Skywave employee will participate in this comprehensive training program. Not because we think you're all biased," she clarified, "but because we all, myself included, have unconscious biases that affect our interactions and decisions." The program Jasmine had developed was unlike the typical corporate diversity training, those perfunctory PowerPoint presentations that employees endured rather than engaged with. Instead, she had brought in experts in unconscious bias, behavioral psychology, and customer experience design to create something truly transformative. Dr. Elaine Chen, a renowned diversity consultant, stepped forward to explain the approach. "This isn't about making anyone feel guilty," Dr. Chen assured the audience. "It's about awareness and tools. Understanding how biases form, recognizing them in action, and developing concrete strategies to ensure they don't impact your professional decisions." As the introduction concluded and attendees broke into smaller workshop groups, Jasmine circulated through the room, observing dynamics and occasionally participating in discussions. The responses varied widely. Some employees leaned in eagerly, relieved that long-standing issues were finally being addressed. Others sat with arms crossed, radiating skepticism or defensiveness. During a coffee break, a senior flight attendant named Michael approached Jasmine in the hallway. "I've been with Skywave for 22 years, he said without preamble. "And I've watched colleagues treat passengers differently based on race, gender, appearance, you name it. I've reported it through proper channels more times than I can count." He shook his head. "Nothing ever changed. Until now." "Why do you think that is?" Jasmine asked. Michael considered the question. "Because before, it was just paperwork. A form that disappeared into HR. Now there's a face to it, yours. And consequences that actually matter." This insight confirmed Jasmine's next initiative. That afternoon, she unveiled a new reporting system for passengers and employees to document instances of discrimination or bias. Unlike the previous process, reports would be reviewed by an independent committee including external experts, and submitters would receive follow-up on actions taken. "Accountability requires transparency," Jasmine explained to the assembled team leaders. "No more reports vanishing into administrative black holes." Not all the changes were met with such understanding. The pilots' union representatives pushed back against new evaluation metrics that included assessment of their interactions with diverse crew members. "We're focused on flying the aircraft safely," argued Captain Reynolds, a veteran pilot with decades of experience. "This feels like mission creep." Jasmine countered calmly, a cockpit where certain crew members feel unwelcome or unheard isn't operating at peak safety. The culture we create affects every aspect of our operation, including safety. Throughout these challenging weeks, Jasmine made a point of spending time with the passengers who had witnessed the original incident. Gerald Wilson, the elderly black first-class regular, became something of an informal advisor, sharing his decades of observations about discrimination in air travel. "The small things matter most," he told her during lunch in the Skywave executive dining room. "It's not usually about being denied service outright. It's the tone of voice. The extra questions. The subtle message that you don't quite belong." Jasmine had incorporated these insights into the training program, emphasizing the cumulative impact of microaggressions that might seem insignificant in isolation. Perhaps the most significant change came in staffing. After an extensive search, Jasmine appointed Jordan Baker, a black woman with 15 years of experience in premium cabin service, as the new head of in-flight training. Jordan's first task was to review and revise the understood procedures that Rebecca had cited, the unwritten rules that had allowed discrimination to flourish under the guise of professional discretion. "If it's not written down, it's not a procedure," became Jordan's mantra as she standardized service protocols to ensure consistent treatment of all passengers. The changes weren't limited to Skywave's internal operations. Jasmine initiated partnerships with historically black colleges and universities to create pipelines for diverse talent in aviation. She established a customer advisory board specifically focused on the experiences of passengers of color. And she commissioned an industry-wide study on discrimination in air travel, positioning Skywave as a leader in addressing an issue many competitors preferred to ignore. These initiatives didn't go unnoticed. Trade publications highlighted Skywave's transformation. Competitors began examining their own practices, if only to avoid similar public relations crises. And regulatory agencies, long criticized for minimal enforcement of anti-discrimination policies in aviation, announced new compliance reviews prompted in part by Skywave's voluntary disclosures. Not all the feedback was positive. Social media remained divided, with some users praising the changes while others dismissed them as woke virtue signaling. Conservative commentators accused Jasmine of implementing a radical agenda. And within the company, pockets of resistance persisted, particularly among long-tenured employees who resented the implication that their previous practices had been problematic. During a particularly difficult meeting with regional managers, one supervisor finally voiced what others had been thinking. "With all due respect, Ms. Washington, it feels like we're being punished for one bad employee's actions. Rebecca Martin doesn't represent all of us." Jasmine considered her response carefully. "You're right that Rebecca doesn't represent everyone at Skywave. But ask yourselves this: how did she last 20 years without anyone effectively addressing her behavior? What systems allowed that to happen? Those are the systems we're changing, not because everyone is like Rebecca, but because our organization enabled her." This framing, focusing on systems rather than individuals, gradually shifted the conversation from defensiveness to constructive engagement. Employees began to see themselves not as targets of criticism but as agents of positive change. By the end of the third week, early results showed promise. Customer satisfaction scores among passengers of color had already improved marginally. Employee reporting of problematic behaviors had increased, suggesting greater awareness and willingness to address issues. And applications for employment at Skywave had surged, particularly among diverse candidates attracted by the company's new reputation for addressing bias head-on. As Jasmine reviewed these preliminary metrics in her office late one evening, Malcolm arrived with an unexpected update. "Rebecca Martin has completed her sensitivity training program," he reported. "Her union rep is requesting a meeting to discuss potential reinstatement." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "What's your assessment?" Malcolm hesitated. "The trainers report she's shown genuine growth. Whether that translates to changed behavior in a high-pressure environment remains to be seen." "Schedule the meeting," Jasmine decided. "But make it clear that any return would be conditional and closely monitored." As Malcolm departed, Jasmine turned to the window, watching a Skywave aircraft making its final approach to Atlanta's airport, its lights cutting through the evening sky. In just 3 weeks, they had begun a transformation that many had deemed impossible. But the real test would come in the months and years ahead, when public attention had moved on and the pressure to maintain these changes diminished. The incident that had launched this journey had lasted less than 15 minutes. The work of ensuring it never happened again would take a lifetime. But as Jasmine watched another Skywave plane take off, climbing into the darkening sky, she felt something she hadn't expected: hope. Not the fragile hope of wishful thinking, but the substantial hope that comes from witnessing real change, however imperfect and incomplete. The transformation had truly begun. 6 months after the incident that had transformed both her career and Skywave Airlines, Jasmine Washington found herself once again in the first-class cabin of a flight from Atlanta to San Francisco. This time, however, there was no anonymity. Crew members nodded respectfully as she boarded, and several passengers recognized her from media coverage of Skywave's highly publicized reforms. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Washington," greeted the lead flight attendant, a woman named Tanya whose professional warmth extended identically to each passenger. "It's an honor to have you with us today." As Jasmine settled into her seat, she observed the boarding process with an evaluator's eye. The changes were subtle but significant: consistent greeting protocols, standardized verification procedures applied equally to all passengers, and crew members trained to recognize and correct their own biases in real time. 6 months of intensive work had transformed Skywave's customer service approach. The Equal Skies initiative had expanded from training to a comprehensive overhaul of company culture. Employee surveys showed increased job satisfaction across demographics. Customer complaints related to discrimination had decreased by 64%. And perhaps most tellingly, Skywave's market share among Black and minority travelers had increased substantially, proving that ethical practices could also be good business. Industry recognition had followed. Aviation Week had named Skywave Most Improved Airline in Customer Experience. 3 competitors had adopted similar anti-bias training programs. And congressional hearings on discrimination in air travel had featured Jasmine as an expert witness, elevating the conversation to a national level. Not all the changes had been smooth. The pilots' union had initially resisted new evaluation metrics until presented with data showing how inclusive cockpit cultures correlated with safety outcomes. Some long-tenured employees had opted for early retirement rather than adapt to new expectations. And a segment of customers, primarily older white men, had vocally declared they would take their business elsewhere, though Skywave's robust booking suggested they were a vocal minority rather than a significant exodus. Jasmine's attention was drawn to a new flight attendant moving confidently through the cabin, Jordan Baker's first successful hire under the revised recruitment protocols. The young woman, Zoe, handled a passenger's complex dietary request with effortless professionalism, a product of the revamped training program that emphasized responsive service for all passengers rather than assumptions based on appearance or status. As the boarding process continued, Jasmine opened her laptop to review the quarterly diversity metrics that had become a standard board presentation. The numbers told a compelling story of transformation. Diverse hiring had increased, promotion patterns had equalized, and retention of minority employees had improved dramatically. Skywave was becoming the employer of choice for aviation professionals from all backgrounds. Her review was interrupted by a familiar voice from the aisle. "Ms. Washington?" Jasmine looked up, momentarily startled. Rebecca Martin stood before her, not in Skywave's uniform but in the navy blue of Continental Airways. Her expression conveyed recognition mixed with obvious discomfort. "Rebecca," Jasmine acknowledged, closing her laptop. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I'm heading back to San Francisco," Rebecca explained, referring to the airline practice of staff traveling as passengers to position for their next assignment. "Continental hired me 3 months ago." An awkward silence followed, heavy with unspoken history. "May I?" Rebecca finally asked, gesturing to the momentarily empty seat beside Jasmine. Jasmine nodded, curious about what her former employee might say. Rebecca sat, her posture rigid. "I've been wanting to talk to you, but I wasn't sure if it would be appropriate to reach out." "And now?" Jasmine prompted. "And now it feels like, maybe it's time." Rebecca took a deep breath. "After everything happened, I was angry. I blamed you for destroying my career. I convinced myself I was the victim." Jasmine remained silent, allowing Rebecca the space to continue. "Part of my onboarding at Continental included their new bias awareness training, which, ironically, was modeled after the program you implemented at Skywave." A rueful smile crossed Rebecca's face. "The instructor used our incident as a case study. They didn't name names, but everyone knew." "That must have been difficult," Jasmine observed neutrally. "It was humiliating," Rebecca admitted. "But it was also necessary." She met Jasmine's gaze directly. "I've spent 6 months reflecting on my behavior that day, and throughout my career. I've had to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself and my assumptions." "And what have you concluded?" Jasmine asked. "That I was wrong," Rebecca stated simply. "Not just about you, but about a lot of things. I treated passengers differently based on race, even when I told myself I wasn't. I applied different standards, asked different questions, made different assumptions." She shook her head. "The worst part is, I genuinely didn't see it. I thought I was just being thorough." The admission hung between them, not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement that carried its own weight. "Continental's training program," Jasmine said after a moment. "Is it effective?" Rebecca considered the question. "It's changing how I think. How I notice my own reactions. I catch myself now, when before I wouldn't have recognized the bias at all." She hesitated. "I'm not perfect. I'm still learning. But I'm trying, and that's something I wasn't doing before." Jasmine nodded, recognizing the genuine effort behind Rebecca's words. "That's all any of us can do, recognize our biases and work to overcome them." "Thank you," Rebecca said quietly. "Not for forgiving me, I don't expect that. But for the wake-up call. As painful as it was, I needed it." Before Jasmine could respond, the boarding announcement indicated final preparations for departure. Rebecca stood, smoothing her uniform. "I should let you get back to your work," she said. "I just wanted you to know that what you did is changing things. Not just at Skywave, but across the industry. Even for people like me who had to learn the hard way." As Rebecca made her way to her assigned seat in economy, Jasmine reflected on the unexpected encounter. It wasn't a Hollywood resolution, no tearful embrace or instant friendship. But it was something perhaps more valuable, evidence that real change was possible, even in the most resistant hearts and minds. The captain's voice came over the intercom as the aircraft pushed back from the gate. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Skywave Flight 2867 to San Francisco. My name is Captain Williams, and I'm pleased to be flying with you today. Before we take off, I'd like to acknowledge a special passenger with us, our Chief Operating Officer, Jasmine Washington, whose leadership has transformed not just our airline but our entire industry's approach to inclusive service. We're proud to demonstrate Skywave's commitment to treating every passenger with equal respect and professionalism." A smattering of applause followed this announcement. Jasmine acknowledged it with a small nod, simultaneously appreciative of the recognition and aware that the work remained incomplete. As the aircraft accelerated down the runway and lifted into the clear blue sky, Jasmine gazed out the window at Atlanta receding below. 6 months ago, she had taken a stand that many had criticized as excessive, even career-ending. Today, that stand had become the foundation for industry-wide transformation. The path forward wasn't without challenges. Changing ingrained behaviors and institutional cultures required constant vigilance. Some would resist, others would backslide, and the work would never truly be finished. But with each flight that departed under Skywave's new protocols, with each crew member trained to recognize and correct bias, with each passenger treated with equal dignity regardless of appearance or background, the possibility of a truly equitable travel experience came closer to reality. As the aircraft climbed toward cruising altitude, Jasmine thought of Gerald Wilson's words from 6 months earlier, "My grandchildren will fly in a different world because of what you did today." Looking around the cabin, where crew members now provided consistent, respectful service to passengers of all backgrounds, Jasmine could see that different world taking shape. Not perfect, not complete, but unmistakably changing for the better. The aircraft banked gently toward the west, toward San Francisco and the Pacific beyond. New horizons indeed. ## lessons learned. Jasmine's story teaches us that meaningful change often requires bold action and unwavering commitment. By confronting discrimination directly rather than looking the other way, she transformed not just one airline but an entire industry. Her journey shows that systemic problems require systemic solutions. Addressing one incident isn't enough when the underlying culture enables bias. The story also highlights how privilege operates invisibly. Rebecca didn't recognize her discriminatory behavior because it was normalized within a system that never questioned it. True transformation requires people to examine their unconscious biases and the unwritten protocols that perpetuate inequality. Perhaps most importantly, we see that change is possible but never instantaneous. It takes continuous effort, institutional commitment, and personal accountability. The work of creating a more equitable world is ongoing. Each victory is meaningful but never the end of the journey. When we stand against discrimination, we create ripples that extend far beyond the initial confrontation. As Gerald Wilson noted, our actions today shape the world future generations will inhabit. What moments have you witnessed where someone stood up against discrimination? Has there been a time when you wished you had spoken up but didn't? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories about overcoming injustice. Don't forget to share with friends who might need inspiration to take their own stand against discrimination. Thank you for joining me on this journey of reflection, and remember, one person with courage can make all the difference in creating a more equitable world.